CostasNarrativeXP presents The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Volume 5, Chapter 96, The Contract. 3 days after the scene we have just described, namely towards 5 o'clock in the afternoon of the day fixed for the signature of the contract between Mademoiselle Eugénie Danglars and Andrea Cavalcanti, whom the banker persisted in calling Prince, a fresh breeze was stirring the leaves in the little garden in front of the Count of Monte Cristo's house, and the Count was preparing to go out, while his horses were impatiently pawing the ground, held in by the coachman, who had been seated a quarter of an hour on his box. The elegant phaeton with which we are familiar rapidly turned the angle of the entrance gate, and cast out on the doorsteps Mr. Andrea Cavalcanti, as decked up and gay as if he were going to marry a princess. He inquired after the Count with his usual familiarity, and ascending lightly to the first story met him at the top of the stairs. The Count stopped on seeing the young man. As for Andrea, he was launched, and when he was once launched, nothing stopped him. "Good morning, my dear Count," said he. Monsieur Andrea," said the latter, with his half-jesting tone. "How do you do?" "Charmingly, as you see. I am come to talk to you about 1,000 things. But first tell me, were you going out or just returned?" "I was going out, sir." "Then, in order not to hinder you, I will get up with you if you please in your carriage, and Tom shall follow with my phaeton in tow." "No," said the Count, with an imperceptible smile of contempt, for he had no wish to be seen in the young man's society. "No, I prefer listening to you here, my dear Mr. Andrea. We can chat better indoors, and there is no coachman to overhear our conversation." The Count returned to a small drawing-room on the first floor, sat down, and crossing his legs motioned to the young man to take his seat also. Andrea assumed his gayest manner. "You know, my dear Count," said he, "the ceremony is to take place this evening. At 9 o'clock the contract is to be signed at my father-in-law's." Indeed," said Monte Cristo. "What, is it news to you? Has not Mr. Danglars informed you of the ceremony?" "Oh, yes," said the Count. "I received a letter from him yesterday, but I do not think the hour was mentioned. Possibly my father-in-law trusted to its general notoriety." "Well," said Monte Cristo, "you are fortunate, Monsieur Cavalcanti. It is a most suitable alliance you are contracting, and Mademoiselle Danglars is a handsome girl." "Yes, indeed she is," replied Cavalcanti, in a very modest tone. "Above all, she is very rich. At least, I believe so," said Monte Cristo. "Very rich, do you think?" replied the young man. "Doubtless. It is said Mr. Danglars conceals at least half of his fortune." "And he acknowledges 15 or 20 millions," said Andrea with a look sparkling with joy. "Without reckoning," added Monte Cristo, "that he is on the eve of entering into a sort of speculation already in vogue in the United States and in England, but quite novel in France." Yes, I know what you mean. The railway, of which he has obtained the grant, is it not?" "Precisely. It is generally believed he will gain 10 millions by that affair." 10 millions? Do you think so? It is magnificent," said Cavalcanti, who was quite confounded at the metallic sound of these golden words. "Without reckoning," replied Monte Cristo, "that all his fortune will come to you, and justly too, since Mademoiselle Danglars is an only daughter. Besides, your own fortune, as your father assured me, is almost equal to that of your betrothed. But enough of money matters. Do you know, Monsieur Andrea, I think you have managed this affair rather skillfully." "Not badly, by any means," said the young man. "I was born for a diplomatist." "Well, you must become a diplomatist. Diplomacy, you know, is something that is not to be acquired. It is instinctive. Have you lost your heart?" "Indeed, I fear it," replied Andrea, in a tone in which he had heard Dorante or Valère reply to Alceste at the Théâtre Français. "Is your love returned?" "I suppose so," said Andrea with a triumphant smile, "since I am accepted. But I must not forget one grand point." "Which?" "That I have been singularly assisted." "Nonsense." "I have, indeed." "By circumstances?" "No, by you." "By me? Not at all, Prince," said Monte Cristo, laying a marked stress on the title. "What have I done for you? Are not your name, your social position, and your merit sufficient?" "No," said Andrea. "No, it is useless for you to say so, Count. I maintain that the position of a man like you has done more than my name, my social position, and my merit." "You are completely mistaken, sir," said Monte Cristo coldly, who felt the perfidious maneuver of the young man, and understood the bearing of his words. "You only acquired my protection after the influence and fortune of your father had been ascertained. For, after all, who procured for me, who had never seen either you or your illustrious father, the pleasure of your acquaintance? Two of my good friends, Lord Wilmore and the Abbé Busoni. What encouraged me not to become your surety, but to patronize you? Your father's name, so well known in Italy and so highly honored. Personally, I do not know you." This calm tone and perfect ease made Andrea feel that he was, for the moment, restrained by a more muscular hand than his own, and that the restraint could not be easily broken through. "Oh, then my father has really a very large fortune, Count." "It appears so, sir," replied Monte Cristo. "Do you know if the marriage settlement he promised me has come?" "I have been advised of it." "But the 3 millions?" "The 3 millions are probably on the road." "Then I shall really have them." "Oh, well," said the Count, "I do not think you have yet known the want of money." Andrea was so surprised that he pondered the matter for a moment, then, arousing from his reverie, "Now, sir, I have one request to make to you, which you will understand, even if it should be disagreeable to you." "Proceed," said Monte Cristo. "I have formed an acquaintance, thanks to my good fortune, with many noted persons, and have, at least for the moment, a crowd of friends. But marrying, as I am about to do, before all Paris, I ought to be supported by an illustrious name, and in the absence of the paternal hand some powerful one ought to lead me to the altar. Now, my father is not coming to Paris, is he?" "He is old, covered with wounds, and suffers dreadfully, he says, in traveling." "I understand. Well, I am come to ask a favor of you." "Of me?" "Yes, of you." "And pray what may it be?" "Well, to take his part." "Ah, my dear sir, what? After the varied relations I have had the happiness to sustain towards you, can it be that you know me so little as to ask such a thing? Ask me to lend you 500,000, and, although such a loan is somewhat rare, on my honor, you would annoy me less. Know, then, what I thought I had already told you, that in participation in this world's affairs, more especially in their moral aspects, the Count of Monte Cristo has never ceased to entertain the scruples and even the superstitions of the East. I, who have a seraglio at Cairo, one at Smyrna, and one at Constantinople, preside at a wedding? Never. Then you refuse me? Decidedly. And were you my son or my brother, I would refuse you in the same way. But what must be done? Said Andrea, disappointed. You said just now that you had 100 friends. Very true, but you introduced me at Mr. Danglars. Not at all. Let us recall the exact facts. You met him at a dinner party at my house, and you introduced yourself at his house. That is a totally different affair. Yes, but by my marriage, you have forwarded that. I? Not in the least, I beg you to believe. Recollect what I told you when you asked me to propose you. Oh, I never make matches, my dear prince. It is my settled principle. Andrea bit his lips. But at least you will be there. Will all Paris be there? Oh, certainly. Well, like all Paris, I shall be there too, said the Count. And will you sign the contract? I see no objection to that. My scruples do not go thus far. Well, since you will grant me no more, I must be content with what you give me. But one word more, Count. What is it? Advice. Be careful. Advice is worse than a service. Oh, you can give me this without compromising yourself. Tell me what it is. Is my wife's fortune 500,000 livres? That is the sum Mr. Danglars himself announced. Must I receive it, or leave it in the hands of the notary? This is the way such affairs are generally arranged when it is wished to do them stylishly. Your two solicitors appoint a meeting. When the contract is signed, for the next or the following day, then they exchange the two portions, for which they each give a receipt. Then, when the marriage is celebrated, they place the amount at your disposal as the chief member of the alliance. Because, said Andrea, with a certain ill-concealed uneasiness, I thought I heard my father-in-law say that he intended embarking our property in that famous railway affair of which you spoke just now. Well, replied Monte Cristo, it will be the way. Everybody says of trebling your fortune in 12 months. Baron Danglars is a good father, and knows how to calculate. In that case, said Andrea, everything is all right, excepting your refusal, which quite grieves me. You must attribute it only to natural scruples under similar circumstances. Well, said Andrea, let it be as you wish. This evening, then, at 9 o'clock. Adieu till then. Notwithstanding a slight resistance on the part of Monte Cristo, whose lips turned pale, but who preserved his ceremonious smile, Andrea seized the Count's hand, pressed it, jumped into his phaeton, and disappeared. The 4 or 5 remaining hours before 9 o'clock arrived. Andrea, employed in riding, paying visits, designed to induce those of whom he had spoken to appear at the banker's in their gayest equipages, dazzling them by promises of shares in schemes which have since turned every brain, and in which Danglars was just taking the initiative. In fact, at 8:30 in the evening, the grand salon, the gallery adjoining, and the 3 other drawing-rooms on the same floor were filled with a perfumed crowd, who sympathized but little in the event, but who all participated in that love of being present wherever there is anything fresh to be seen. An academician would say that the entertainments of the fashionable world are collections of flowers which attract inconstant butterflies, famished bees, and buzzing drones. No one could deny that the rooms were splendidly illuminated. The light streamed forth on the gilt mouldings and the silk hangings, and all the bad taste of decorations, which had only their richness to boast of, shone in its splendor. Mademoiselle Eugénie was dressed with elegant simplicity in a figured white silk dress, and a white rose half concealed in her jet-black hair was her only ornament, unaccompanied by a single jewel. Her eyes, however, betrayed that perfect confidence which contradicted the girlish simplicity of this modest attire. Madame Danglars was chatting at a short distance with Debray, Beauchamp, and Chateau Renaud. Debray was admitted to the house for this grand ceremony, but on the same plane with everyone else, and without any particular privilege. Mr. Danglars, surrounded by deputies and men connected with the revenue, was explaining a new theory of taxation which he intended to adopt when the course of events had compelled the government to call him into the ministry. Andrea, on whose arm hung one of the most consummate dandies of the opera, was explaining to him rather cleverly, since he was obliged to be bold to appear at ease, his future projects, and the new luxuries he meant to introduce to Parisian fashions with his 175,000 livres per annum. The crowd moved to and fro in the rooms like an ebb and flow of turquoises, rubies, emeralds, opals, and diamonds. As usual, the oldest women were the most decorated, and the ugliest the most conspicuous. If there was a beautiful lily or a sweet rose, you had to search for it, concealed in some corner behind a mother with a turban, or an aunt with a bird of paradise. At each moment, in the midst of the crowd, the buzzing and the laughter, the doorkeeper's voice was heard announcing some name well known in the financial department, respected in the army, or illustrious in the literary world, and which was acknowledged by a slight movement in the different groups. but for one whose privilege it was to agitate that ocean of human waves, how many were received with a look of indifference or a sneer of disdain. At the moment when the hand of the massive timepiece, representing Endymion asleep, pointed to 9 on its golden face, and a hammer, the faithful type of mechanical thought, struck 9 times, the name of the Count of Monte Cristo resounded in its turn, and as if by an electric shock all the assembly turned towards the door. The Count was dressed in black and with his habitual simplicity. His white waistcoat displayed his expansive noble chest, and his black stock was singularly noticeable because of its contrast with the deadly paleness of his face. His only jewelry was a chain, so fine that the slender gold thread was scarcely perceptible on his white waistcoat. A circle was immediately formed around the door. The Count perceived at one glance Madame Danglars at one end of the drawing-room, Monsieur Danglars at the other, and Eugénie in front of him. He first advanced towards the Baroness, who was chatting with Madame de Villefort, who had come alone, Valentine being still an invalid. And without turning aside, so clear was the road left for him, he passed from the Baroness to Eugénie, who he complimented in such rapid and measured terms that the proud artist was quite struck. Near her was Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly, who thanked the Count for the letters of introduction he had so kindly given her for Italy, which she intended immediately to make use of. On leaving these ladies, he found himself with Danglars, who had advanced to meet him. Having accomplished these 3 social duties, Monte Cristo stopped, looking around him with that expression peculiar to a certain class, which seems to say, "I have done my duty, now let others do theirs." Andrea, who was in an adjoining room, had shared in the sensation caused by the arrival of Monte Cristo, and now came forward to pay his respects to the Count. He found him completely surrounded. All were eager to speak to him, as is always the case with those whose words are few and weighty. The solicitors arrived at this moment and arranged their scrawled papers on the velvet cloth embroidered with gold which covered the table prepared for the signature. It was a gilt table supported on lion's claws. One of the notaries sat down, the other remained standing. They were about to proceed to the reading of the contract, which half Paris assembled was to sign. All took their places, or rather the ladies formed a circle, while the gentlemen commented on the feverish agitation of Andrea, on Mr. Danglars' riveted attention, Eugénie's composure, and the light and sprightly manner in which the Baroness treated this important affair. The contract was read during a profound silence. But as soon as it was finished, the buzz was redoubled through all the drawing-rooms. The brilliant sums, the rolling millions which were to be at the command of the 2 young people, and which crowned the display of the wedding presents and the young lady's diamonds, which had been made in a room entirely appropriated for that purpose, had exercised to the full their delusions over the envious assembly. Mademoiselle Danglars' charms were heightened in the opinion of the young men, and for the moment seemed to outvie the sun in splendor. As for the ladies, it is needless to say that while they coveted the millions, they thought they did not need them for themselves, as they were beautiful enough without them. Andrea, surrounded by his friends, complimented, flattered, beginning to believe in the reality of his dream, was almost bewildered. The notary solemnly took the pen, flourished it above his head, and said, "Gentlemen, we are about to sign the contract." The Baron was to sign first, then the representative of Mr. Cavalcanti, senior, then the Baroness, afterwards the future couple, as they are styled in the abominable phraseology of legal documents. The Baron took the pen and signed, then the representative. The Baroness approached, leaning on Madame de Villefort's arm. "My dear," said she, as she took the pen, "is it not vexatious? An unexpected incident in the affair of murder and theft at the Count of Monte Cristo's, in which he nearly fell a victim, deprives us of the pleasure of seeing Monsieur de Villefort." "Indeed," said Mr. Danglars, in the same tone in which he would have said, "Oh, well, what do I care?" "As a matter of fact," said Monte Cristo, approaching, "I am much afraid that I am the involuntary cause of his absence." "What? You, Count?" said Madame Danglars, sighing. "If you are, take care, for I shall never forgive you." Andrea pricked up his ears. "But it is not my fault, as I shall endeavor to prove." Everyone listened eagerly. Monte Cristo, who so rarely opened his lips, was about to speak. "You remember," said the Count, during the most profound silence, "that the unhappy wretch who came to rob me died at my house. The supposition is that he was stabbed by his accomplice on attempting to leave it." "Yes," said Danglars. "In order that his wounds might be examined, he was undressed, and his clothes were thrown into a corner, where the police picked him up, with the exception of the waistcoat, which they overlooked." Andrea turned pale and drew towards the door. He saw a cloud rising in the horizon, which appeared to forebode a coming storm. "Well, this waistcoat was discovered today, covered with blood, and with a hole over the heart." The lady screamed, and 2 or 3 prepared to faint. It was brought to me. No one could guess what the dirty rag could be. I alone suspected that it was the waistcoat of the murdered man. My valet, in examining this mournful relic, felt a paper in the pocket and drew it out. It was a letter addressed to you, Baron. "To me!" cried Danglars. "Yes, indeed, to you. I succeeded in deciphering your name under the blood with which the letter was stained," replied Monte Cristo, amid the general outburst of amazement. "But," asked Madame Danglars, looking at her husband with uneasiness, "how could that prevent Monsieur de Villefort?" "In this simple way, madame," replied Monte Cristo. "The waistcoat and the letter were both what is termed circumstantial evidence. I therefore sent them to the king's attorney. You understand, my dear baron, that legal methods are the safest in criminal cases. It was, perhaps, some plot against you." Andrea looked steadily at Monte Cristo and disappeared in a second drawing room. "Possibly," said Danglars. "Was not this murdered man an old galley slave?" "Yes," replied the Count, "a fellow named Caderousse." Danglars turned slightly pale. Andrea reached the anteroom beyond the little drawing room. "But go on signing," said Monte Cristo. "I perceive that my story has caused a general emotion, and I beg to apologize to you, Baroness, and to Mademoiselle Danglars." The Baroness, who had signed, returned the pen to the notary. "Prince Cavalcanti," said the letter. "Prince Cavalcanti, where are you?" "Andrea, Andrea," repeated several young people, who were already on sufficiently intimate terms with him to call him by his Christian name. "Call the prince, inform him that it is his turn to sign," cried Danglars to one of the floor keepers. But at the same instant the crowd of guests rushed in alarm into the principal salon, as if some frightful monster had entered the apartments. Quaerens quem deforet. There was, indeed, reason to retreat, to be alarmed, and to scream. An officer was placing 2 soldiers at the door of each drawing room, and was advancing towards Danglars, preceded by a commissary of police, girded with his scarf. Madame Danglars uttered a scream and fainted. Danglars, who thought himself threatened, Danglars, even before his guests, showed a countenance of abject terror. "What is the matter, sir?" asked Monte Cristo, advancing to meet the commissioner. "Which of you gentlemen," asked the magistrate, without replying to the Count, "answers to the name of Andrea Cavalcanti?" A cry of astonishment was heard from all parts of the room. They searched, they questioned. "But who then is Andrea Cavalcanti?" asked Danglars in amazement. "A galley slave, escaped from confinement at Toulon." "And what crime has he committed?" "He is accused," said the commissary with his inflexible voice, "of having assassinated the man named Caderousse, his former companion in prison, at the moment he was making his escape from the house of the Count of Monte Cristo." Monte Cristo cast a rapid glance around him. Andrea was gone. Chapter 97. The Departure for Belgium. A few minutes after the scene of confusion produced in the salon of Monsieur Danglars by the unexpected appearance of the brigade of soldiers, and by the disclosure which had followed, the mansion was deserted with as much rapidity as if a case of plague or of cholera morbus had broken out among the guests. In a few minutes, through all the doors, down all the staircases, by every exit, everyone hastened to retire, or rather to fly, for it was a situation where the ordinary condolences, which even the best friends are so eager to offer in great catastrophes, were seen to be utterly futile. There remained in the banker's house only Danglars, closeted in his study, and making his statement to the officer of gendarmes. Madame Danglars, terrified, in a boudoir with which we are acquainted, and Eugénie, who with haughty air and disdainful lip had retired to her room with her inseparable companion, Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly. As for the numerous servants, venting on their employers their anger at what they termed the insult to which they had been subjected, they collected in groups in the hall, in the kitchens, or in their rooms, thinking very little of their duty, which was thus naturally interrupted. Of all this household, only 2 persons deserve our notice. These are Mademoiselle Eugénie Danglars and Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly. The betrothed had retired, as we said, with haughty air, disdainful lip, and the demeanour of an outraged queen, followed by her companion, who was paler and more disturbed than herself. On reaching her room, Eugénie locked her door, while Louise fell on a chair. "Ah, what a dreadful thing," said the young musician. "Who would have suspected it? Mr. Andrea Cavalcanti, a murderer, a galley slave escaped, a convict." An ironical smile curled the lip of Eugénie. "In truth, I was fated," said she. "I escaped the Morcerf only to fall into the Cavalcanti." "Oh, do not confound the two, Eugénie." "Hold your tongue. The men are all infamous, and I am happy to be able now to do more than detest them. I despise them." "What shall we do?" asked Louise. "What shall we do?" "Yes." "Why, the same we had intended doing 3 days since. Set off." "What? Although you are not now going to be married, you intend still—" "Listen, Louise. I hate this life of the fashionable world, always ordered, measured, ruled, like our music paper. What I have always wished for, desired, and coveted is the life of an artist, free and independent, relying only on my own resources, and accountable only to myself. Remain here? What for? That they may try, a month hence, to marry me again. And to whom? Monsieur Debray, perhaps, as it was once proposed. No, Louise, no. This evening's adventure will serve for my excuse. I did not seek one. I did not ask for one. God sends me this, and I hail it joyfully." "How strong and courageous you are," said the fair, frail girl to her brunette companion. "Did you not yet know me? Come, Louise, let us talk of our affairs. The post-chaise was happily bought 3 days since. Have you had it sent where we are to go for it?" "Yes." "Our passport?" "Here it is." And Eugénie, with her usual precision, opened a printed paper and read, "Monsieur Léon d'Armilly, 20 years of age, profession artist, hair black, eyes black, travelling with his sister." "Capital! How did you get this passport?" "When I went to ask Monsieur de Monte Cristo for letters to the directors of the theatres at Rome and Naples, I expressed my fears of travelling as a woman. He perfectly understood them, and undertook to procure for me a man's passport, and 2 days after I received this, to which I have added with my own hand, travelling with his sister." "Well," said Eugénie cheerfully, "we have then only to pack up our trunks. We shall start the evening of the signing of the contract, instead of the evening of the wedding. That is all." "But consider the matter seriously, Eugénie." "Oh, I am done with considering. I am tired of hearing only of market reports, of the end of the month, of the rise and fall of Spanish funds, of Haitian bonds. Instead of that, Louise, do you understand? Air, liberty, melody of birds, plains of Lombardy, Venetian canals, Roman palaces, the Bay of Naples. How much have we, Louise?" The young girl to whom this question was addressed drew from an inlaid secretaire a small portfolio with a lock, in which she counted 23 banknotes. 23,000 francs, said she. and as much, at least, in pearls, diamonds, and jewels, said Eugénie. We are rich. With 45,000 francs, we can live like princesses for 2 years, and comfortably for 4. But before 6 months, you with your music, and I with my voice, we shall double our capital. Come, you shall take charge of the money, I of the jewel box, so that if one of us had the misfortune to lose her treasure, the other would still have hers left. Now, the portmanteau. Let us make haste. The portmanteau. Stop, said Louise, going to listen at Madame Danglars' door. What do you fear? That we may be discovered. The door is locked. They may tell us to open it. They may, if they like, but we will not. You are a perfect Amazon, Eugénie. And the 2 young girls began to heap into a trunk all the things they thought they should require. There now, said Eugénie. While I change my costume, do you lock the portmanteau. Louise pressed with all the strength of her little hands on the top of the portmanteau. But I cannot, said she. I am not strong enough. Do you shut it? Oh, you do well to ask, said Eugénie, laughing. I forgot that I was Hercules, and you only the pale Omphale. And the young girl, kneeling on the top, pressed the 2 parts of the portmanteau together, and Mademoiselle d'Armilly passed the bolts of the padlock through. When this was done, Eugénie opened a drawer, of which she kept the key, and took from it a weathered violet silk travelling cloak. Here, said she, you see I have thought of everything. With this cloak you will not be cold. But you? Oh, I'm never cold, you know. Besides, with these men's clothes. Will you dress here? Certainly. Shall you have time? Do not be uneasy, you little coward. All our servants are busy discussing the grand affair. Besides, what is there astonishing, when you think of the grief I ought to be in, that I shut myself up? Tell me. No, truly, you comfort me. Come and help me. From the same drawer she took a man's complete costume, from the boots to the coat, and a provision of linen, where there was nothing superfluous, but every requisite. Then, with a promptitude which indicated that this was not the first time she had amused herself by adopting the garb of the opposite sex, Eugénie drew on the boots and pantaloons, tied her cravat, buttoned her waistcoat up to the throat, and put on a coat which admirably fitted her beautiful figure. Oh, that is very good indeed. It is very good, said Louise, looking at her with admiration. But that beautiful black hair, those magnificent braids, which made all the ladies sigh with envy, will they go under a man's hat like the one I see down there? You shall see, said Eugénie, and with her left hand seizing the thick mass, which her long fingers could scarcely grasp, she took in her right hand a pair of long scissors, and soon the steel met through the rich and splendid hair, which fell in a cluster at her feet as she leaned back to keep it from her coat. Then she grasped the front hair, which she also cut off, without expressing the least regret. On the contrary, her eyes sparkled with greater pleasure than usual under her ebony eyebrows. Oh, the magnificent hair, said Louise, with regret. And am I not 100 times better thus? Cried Eugénie, smoothing the scattered curls of her hair, which had now quite a masculine appearance. And do you not think me handsomer so? Oh, you are beautiful, always beautiful, cried Louise. Now, where are you going? To Brussels, if you like. It is the nearest frontier. We can go to Brussels, Liège, Aix-la-Chapelle, then up to the Rhine to Strasbourg. We will cross Switzerland and go down into Italy by the Saint-Gothard. Will that do? Yes. What are you looking at? I am looking at you. Indeed, you are adorable like that. One would say you were carrying me off. And they would be right, pardieu. Oh, I think you swore, Eugénie. And the 2 young girls, whom everyone might have thought plunged in grief, the one on her own account, the other from interest in her friend, burst out laughing, as they cleared away every visible trace of the disorder which had naturally accompanied the preparations for their escape. Then, having blown out the lights, the 2 fugitives, looking and listening eagerly, with outstretched necks, opened the door of a dressing-room which led by a side staircase down to the yard, Eugénie going first, and holding with one arm the portmanteau, which by the opposite handle Mademoiselle d'Armilly scarcely raised with both hands. The yard was empty. The clock was striking 12. The porter was not yet gone to bed. Eugénie approached softly, and saw the old man sleeping soundly in an armchair in his lodge. She returned to Louise, took up the portmanteau, which she had placed for a moment on the ground, and they reached the archway under the shadow of the wall. Eugénie concealed Louise in an angle of the gateway, so that if the porter chanced to awake he might see but one person. Then placing herself in the full light of the lamp which lit the yard, "Gate!" cried she, with her finest contralto voice, and rapping at the window. The porter got up as Eugénie expected, and even advanced some steps to recognize the person who was going out, but seeing a young man striking his boot impatiently with his riding whip, he opened it immediately. Louise slid through the half-open gate like a snake, and bounded lightly forward. Eugénie, apparently calm, although in all probability her heart beat somewhat faster than usual, went out in her turn. A porter was passing, and they gave him the portmanteau. Then the two young girls, having told him to take it to number 36, Rue de la Victoire, walked behind this man, whose presence comforted Louise. As for Eugénie, she was as strong as a Judith or a Delilah. They arrived at the appointed spot. Eugénie ordered the porter to put down the portmanteau, gave him some pieces of money, and having rapped at the shutter, sent him away. The shutter where Eugénie had rapped was that of a little laundress, who had been previously warned, and was not yet gone to bed. She opened the door. "Mademoiselle," said Eugénie, "let the porter get the post-chaise from the coach-house, and fetch some post-horses from the hotel. Here are 5 francs for his trouble." "Indeed," said Louise, "I admire you, and I could almost say respect you." The laundress looked on in astonishment, but as she had been promised 20 louis, she made no remark. In a quarter of an hour the porter returned with a post-boy and horses, which were harnessed, and put in the post-chaise in a minute, while the porter fastened the portmanteau on with the assistance of a cord and strap. "Here is the passport," said the postilion. "Which way are we going, young gentleman?" "To Fontainebleau," replied Eugénie with an almost masculine voice. "What do you say?" said Louise. "I am giving them the slip," said Eugénie. "This woman, to whom we have given 20 louis, may betray us for 40. We will soon alter our direction." And a young girl jumped into the britska, which was admirably arranged for sleeping in, without scarcely touching the step. "You are always right," said the music teacher, seating herself by the side of her friend. A quarter of an hour afterwards the postilion, having been put in the right road, passed with a crack of his whip through the gateway of the Barrière Saint-Martin. "Ah," said Louise, breathing freely, "here we are out of Paris." "Yes, my dear, the abduction is an accomplished fact," replied Eugénie. "Yes, and without violence," said Louise. "I shall bring that forward as an extenuating circumstance," replied Eugénie. These words were lost in the noise which the carriage made in rolling over the pavement of La Villette. Mr. Danglars no longer had a daughter. Chapter 98. The Bell and Bottle Tavern. And now let us leave Mademoiselle Danglars and her friend pursuing their way to Brussels, and return to poor Andrea Cavalcanti, so importunately interrupted in his rise to fortune. Notwithstanding his youth, Master Andrea was a very skilful and intelligent boy. We have seen that on the first rumor which reached the salon he had gradually approached the door, and crossing 2 or 3 rooms at last disappeared. But we have forgotten to mention one circumstance, which nevertheless ought not to be omitted. In one of the rooms he crossed, the trousseau of the bride-elect was on exhibition. There were caskets of diamonds, cashmere shawls, Valenciennes lace, English veils, and in fact all the tempting things, the bare mention of which makes the hearts of young girls bound with joy, and which is called the corbeille. Now, in passing through this room, Andrea proved himself not only to be clever and intelligent, but also provident, for he helped himself to the most valuable of the ornaments before him. Furnished with this plunder, Andrea leaped with a lighter heart from the window, intending to slip through the hands of the gendarme. Tall and well-proportioned as an ancient gladiator and muscular as a Spartan, he walked for a quarter of an hour without knowing where to direct his steps, actuated by the sole idea of getting away from the spot where, if he lingered, he knew that he would surely be taken. Having passed through the Rue de Mont Blanc, guided by the instinct which leads thieves always to take the safest path, he found himself at the end of the Rue Lafayette. There he stopped, breathless and panting. He was quite alone. On one side was the vast wilderness of the Saint-Lazare, on the other, Paris enshrouded in darkness. "Am I to be captured?" he cried. "No, not if I can use more activity than my enemies. My safety is now a mere question of speed." At this moment he saw a cab at the top of the Faubourg Poissonnière. The dull driver, smoking his pipe, was plodding along toward the limits of the Faubourg Saint-Denis, where no doubt he ordinarily had his station. "Ho, friend," said Benedetto. "What do you want, sir?" asked the driver. "Is your horse tired?" "Tired? Oh, yes, tired enough. He has done nothing the whole of this blessed day. 4 wretched fares, and 20 sous over, making in all 7 francs, are all that I have earned, and I ought to take 10 to the owner." "Will you add these 20 francs to the 7 you have?" "With pleasure, sir. 20 francs are not to be despised. Tell me what I am to do for this." "A very easy thing, if your horse isn't tired. I tell you he'll go like the wind. Only tell me which way to drive." "Towards the Louvres." "Oh, I know the way. You get good sweetened rum over there." "Exactly so. I merely wish to overtake one of my friends, with whom I am going to hunt tomorrow at Chapelon-Serval. He should have waited for me here with a cabriolet till 11:30. It is 12, and tired of waiting, he must have gone on." "It is likely." "Well, will you try and overtake him?" "Nothing I should like better. If you do not overtake him before we reach Bourget, you shall have 20 francs. If not before Louvres, 30. "And if we do overtake him?" 40, said Andrea, after a moment's hesitation, at the end of which he remembered that he might safely promise. "That's all right," said the man. "Hop in, and we're off." Andrea got into the cab, which passed rapidly through the Faubourg Saint-Denis, along the Faubourg Saint-Martin, crossed the barrier, and threaded its way through the interminable Villette. They never overtook the chimerical friend, yet Andrea frequently inquired of people on foot whom he passed and in the inns which were not yet closed, for a green cabriolet and bay horse. And as there are a great many cabriolets to be seen on the road to the Low Countries, and as 9/10 of them are green, the inquiries increased at every step. Everyone had just seen it pass. It was only 500, 200, 100 steps in advance. At length they reached it. But it was not the friend. Once the cab was also passed by a calash rapidly whirled along by 2 post horses. "Ah," said Cavalcanti to himself, "if I only had that Britska, those 2 good post horses, and above all the passport that carries them on," and he sighed deeply. The calash contained Mademoiselle Danglars and Mademoiselle d'Armilly. "Hurry, hurry," said Andrea. "We must overtake him soon." And the poor horse resumed the desperate gallop it had kept up since leaving the barrier, and arrived steaming at Louvres. "Certainly," said Andrea, "I shall not overtake my friend, but I shall kill your horse. Therefore I had better stop. Here are 30 francs. I will sleep at the Cheval Rouge, and will secure a place in the first coach. Good night, friend." And Andrea, after placing 6 pieces of 5 francs each in the man's hand, leaped lightly on to the pathway. The cabman joyfully pocketed the sum, and turned back on his road to Paris. Andrea pretended to go towards the Hotel de Cheval Rouge, but after leaning an instant against the door, and hearing the last sound of the cab, which was disappearing from view, he went on his road, and with a lusty stride soon traversed the space of 2 leagues. Then he rested. He must be near Chapelon-Serval, where he pretended to be going. It was not fatigue that stayed Andrea here. It was that he might form some resolution, adopt some plan. It would be impossible to make use of a diligence, equally so to engage post horses. To travel either way, a passport was necessary. It was still more impossible to remain in the department of the Oise, of the most open and strictly guarded in France. This was quite out of the question, especially to a man like Andrea, perfectly conversant with criminal matters. He sat down by the side of the moat, buried his face in his hands, and reflected. 10 minutes after, he raised his head. His resolution was made. He threw some dust over the topcoat, which he had found time to unhook from the antechamber and button over his ball costume, and going to Chapelon-Ceval, he knocked loudly at the door of the only inn in the place. The host opened. "My friend," said Andrea, "I was coming from Montefontaine to Senlis, when my horse, which is a troublesome creature, stumbled and threw me. I must reach Compiègne tonight, or I shall cause deep anxiety to my family. Could you let me hire a horse of you?" An innkeeper has always a horse to let, whether it be good or bad. The host called the stable boy and ordered him to saddle Leblanc. Then he awoke his son, a child of 7 years, whom he ordered to ride before the gentleman and bring back the horse. Andrea gave the innkeeper 20 francs, and in taking them from his pocket dropped a visiting card. This belonged to one of his friends at the Café de Paris, so that the innkeeper, picking it up after Andrea had left, was convinced that he had let his horse to the Count of Moulion, 25 Rue Saint-Dominique, that being the name and address on the card. Leblanc was not a fast animal, but he kept up an easy, steady pace. In 3 hours and a half, Andrea had traversed the 9 leagues which separated him from Compiègne, and 4 o'clock struck as he reached the place where the coaches stop. There is an excellent tavern at Compiègne, well remembered by those who have ever been there. Andrea, who had often stayed there in his rides about Paris, recollected the Bell and Bottle Inn. He turned around, saw the sign by the light of a reflected lamp, and having dismissed the child, giving him all the small coin he had about him, he began knocking at the door, very reasonably concluding that having now 3 or 4 hours before him, he had best fortify himself against the fatigues of the morrow by a sound sleep and a good supper. The waiter opened the door. "My friend," said Andrea, "I have been dining at Saint-Jean-au-Bois, and expected to catch the coach which passes by at midnight. But like a fool I have lost my way, and have been walking for the last 4 hours in the forest. Show me into one of those pretty little rooms which overlook the court, and bring me a cold fowl and a bottle of Bordeaux." The waiter had no suspicions. Andrea spoke with perfect composure. He had a cigar in his mouth, and his hands in the pockets of his topcoat. His clothes were fashionably made, his chin smooth, his boots irreproachable. He looked merely as if he had stayed out very late, that was all. While the waiter was preparing his room, the hostess arose. Andrea assumed his most charming smile, and asked if he could have number 3, which he had occupied on his last day at Compiègne. Unfortunately, number 3 was engaged by a young man who was travelling with his sister. Andrea appeared in despair, but consoled himself when the hostess assured him that number 7, prepared for him, was situated precisely the same as number 3, and while warming his feet and chatting about the last races at Chantilly, he waited until they announced his room to be ready. Andrea had not spoken without cause of the pretty rooms looking out upon the court of the Belle Hotel, which, with its triple galleries like those of a theatre, like the jasmine and clematis twining round the light columns, forms one of the prettiest entrances to an inn that you can imagine. The fowl was tender, the wine old, the fire clear and sparkling, and Andrea was surprised to find himself eating with as good an appetite as though nothing had happened. Then he went to bed and almost immediately fell into that deep sleep which is sure to visit men of 20 years of age, even when they are torn with remorse. Now here we are obliged to own that Andrea ought to have felt remorse, but that he did not. This was the plan which had appealed to him to afford the best chance of his security. Before daybreak he would awake, leave the inn after rigorously paying his bill, and reaching the forest, he would, under pretense of making studies in painting, test the hospitality of some peasants, procure himself the dress of a woodcutter and a hatchet, casting off the lion's skin to assume that of the woodman, then, with his hands covered with dirt, his hair darkened by means of a leaden comb, his complexion embrowned with a preparation for which one of his old comrades had given him the recipe, he intended, by following the wooded districts, to reach the nearest frontier, walking by night and sleeping in the day in the forests and quarries, and only entering inhabited regions to buy a loaf from time to time. Once past the frontier, Andrea proposed making money of his diamonds, and by uniting the proceeds to 10 banknotes he always carried about with him in case of accident, he would then find himself possessor of about 50,000 livres, which he philosophically considered as no very deplorable condition after all. Moreover, he reckoned much on the interest of the Danglars to hush up the rumor of their own misadventures. These were the reasons which, added to the fatigue, caused Andrea to sleep so soundly. In order that he might wake early, he did not close the shutters, but contented himself with bolting the door and placing on the table an unclasped and long-pointed knife, whose temper he well knew, and which was never absent from him. After 7 in the morning, Andrea was awakened by a ray of sunlight, which played, warm and brilliant, upon his face. In all well-organized brains, the predominating idea, and there always is one, is sure to be the last thought before sleeping, and the first upon waking in the morning. Andrea had scarcely opened his eyes when his predominating idea presented itself, and whispered in his ear that he had slept too long. He jumped out of bed and ran to the window. A gendarme was crossing the court. A gendarme is one of the most striking objects in the world, even to a man void of uneasiness, but for one who has a timid conscience, and with good cause too. The yellow, blue, and white uniform is really very alarming. "Why is that gendarme there?" asked Andrea of himself. Then, all at once, he replied, with that logic which the reader has, doubtless, remarked in him. "There is nothing astonishing in seeing a gendarme at an inn. Instead of being astonished, let me dress myself." And the youth dressed himself with a facility his valet de chambre had failed to rob him of during the 2 months of fashionable life he had led in Paris. "Now then," said Andrea, while dressing himself, "I'll wait till he leaves, and then I'll slip away." And saying this, Andrea, who had now put on his boots and cravat, stole gently to the window, and a second time lifted up the muslin curtain. Not only was the first gendarme still there, but the young man now perceived a second yellow, blue, and white uniform at the foot of the staircase, the only one by which he could descend, while a third, on horseback, holding a musket in his fist, was posted as a sentinel at the great street door which alone afforded the means of egress. The appearance of the third gendarme settled the matter, for a crowd of curious loungers was extended before him, effectually blocking the entrance to the hotel. "They're after me," was Andrea's first thought. "Diable!" The pallor overspread the young man's forehead, and he looked round him with anxiety. His room, like all those on the same floor, had but one outlet to the gallery in the sight of everybody. "I'm lost," was his second thought, and, indeed, for a man in Andrea's situation, an arrest meant the assizes, trial, and death. Death without mercy or delay. For a moment he convulsively pressed his head within his hands, and during that brief period he became nearly mad with terror. But soon a ray of hope glimmered in a multitude of thoughts which bewildered his mind, and a faint smile played upon his white lips and pallid cheeks. He looked around and saw the objects of his search upon the chimney-piece. They were a pen, ink, and paper. With forced composure he dipped the pen in the ink, and wrote the following lines upon a sheet of paper. "I have no money to pay my bill, but I am not a dishonest man. I leave behind me as a pledge this pen, worth 10 times the amount. I shall be excused for leaving at daybreak, for I was ashamed." He then drew the pin from his cravat and placed it on the paper. This done, instead of leaving the door fastened, he drew back the bolts and even placed the door ajar, as though he had left the room, forgetting to close it, and slipping into the chimney like a man accustomed to that kind of gymnastic exercise, after replacing the chimney board, which represented Achilles with Deidamia, and effacing the very marks of his feet upon the ashes, he commenced climbing the hollow tunnel, which afforded him the only means of escape left. At this precise time, the first gendarme Andrea had noticed walked upstairs, preceded by the commissary of police, and supported by the second gendarme who guarded the staircase and was himself reinforced by the one stationed at the door. Andrea was indebted for this visit to the following circumstances. At daybreak, the telegraphs were sent at work in all directions, and almost immediately the authorities in every district had exerted their utmost endeavors to arrest the murderer of Caderousse. Compiègne, that royal residence and fortified town, is well furnished with authorities, gendarmes, and commissaries of police. They therefore began operations as soon as the telegraphic dispatch arrived, and the Bell and Bottle being the best-known hotel in the town, they had naturally directed their first inquiries there. Now, besides the reports of the sentinels guarding the Hôtel de Ville, which is next door to the Bell and Bottle, it had been stated by others that a number of travellers had arrived during the night. The sentinel, who was relieved at 6 o'clock in the morning, remembered perfectly that, just as he was taking his post a few minutes past 4, a young man arrived on horseback, with a little boy before him. The young man, having dismissed the boy and horse, knocked at the door of the hotel, which was opened, and again closed after his entrance. This late arrival had attracted much suspicion, and the young man being no other than Andrea, the commissary and gendarme, who was a brigadier, directed their steps towards his room. They found the door ajar. Oh, said the brigadier, who thoroughly understood the trick. A bad sign to find the door open. I would rather find it triply bolted. And indeed, the little note and pin upon the table confirmed, or rather corroborated, the sad truth. Andrea had fled. We say corroborated because the brigadier was too experienced to be convinced by a single proof. He glanced around, looked in the bed, shook the curtains, opened the closets, and finally stopped at the chimney. Andrea had taken the precaution to leave no traces of his feet in the ashes, but still it was an outlet, and in this light was not to be passed over without serious investigation. The brigadier sent for some sticks and straw, and having filled the chimney with them, set a light to it. The fire crackled, and the smoke ascended like the dull vapor from a volcano, but still no prisoner fell down, as they expected. The fact was that Andrea, at war with society ever since his youth, was quite as deep as a gendarme. Even though he were advanced to the rank of brigadier, and quite prepared for the fire, he had climbed out on the roof and was crouching down against the chimney pots. At one time he thought he was saved, for he heard the brigadier exclaim in a loud voice to the two gendarmes, "He is not here." But venturing to peep, he perceived that the latter, instead of retiring, as might have been reasonably expected upon this announcement, were watching with increased attention. It was now his turn to look about him. The Hôtel de Ville, a massive 16th century building, was on his right. Anyone could descend from the openings in the tower and examine every corner of the roof below, and Andrea expected momentarily to see the head of a gendarme appear at one of these openings. If once discovered, he knew he would be lost, for the roof afforded no chance of escape. He therefore resolved to descend, not through the same chimney by which he had come up, but by a similar one conducting to another room. He looked around for a chimney from which no smoke issued, and having reached it, he disappeared through the orifice without being seen by anyone. At the same minute, one of the little windows of the Hôtel de Ville was thrown open, and the head of a gendarme appeared. For an instant it remained motionless as one of the stone decorations of the building, then after a long sigh of disappointment the head disappeared. The brigadier, calm and dignified as the law he represented, passed through the crowd, without answering the 1,000 questions addressed to him, and re-entered the hotel. "Well?" asked the two gendarmes. "Well, my boys," said the brigadier, "the brigand must really have escaped early this morning, but we will send to the Ville Cotteret and the Noyon roads, and search the forest, when we shall catch him, no doubt." The honorable functionary had scarcely expressed himself thus, in that intonation which is peculiar to brigadiers of the gendarmerie, when a loud scream, accompanied by the violent ringing of a bell, resounded through the court of the hotel. "Ah, what is that?" cried the brigadier. "Some traveller seems impatient," said the host. "What number was it that rang?" "Number 3. "Run, waiter." At this moment the screams and ringing were redoubled. "Aha," said the brigadier, stopping the servant. "The person who is ringing appears to want something more than a waiter. We will attend upon him with a gendarme. Who occupies number 3? "The little fellow who arrived last night in a post-chaise with his sister, and who asked for an apartment with 2 beds. The bell here rang for the 3rd time, with another shriek of anguish. "Follow me, Mr. Commissary," said the brigadier. "Tread in my steps." "Wait an instant," said the host. "Number 3 has 2 staircases, inside and outside." "Good," said the brigadier. "I will take charge of the inside one. Are the carbines loaded?" "Yes, brigadier." "Well, you guard the exterior, and if he attempts to fly, fire upon him. He must be a great criminal, from what the telegraph says." The brigadier, followed by the commissary, disappeared by the inside staircase, accompanied by the noise which his assertions respecting Andrea had excited in the crowd. This is what had happened. Andrea had very cleverly managed to descend 2/3 of the chimney, but then his foot slipped, and notwithstanding his endeavors, he came into the room with more speed and noise than he intended. It would have signified little had the room been empty, but unfortunately it was occupied. 2 ladies, sleeping in one bed, were awakened by the noise, and fixing their eyes upon the spot whence the sound proceeded, they saw a man. One of these ladies, the fair one, uttered those terrible shrieks which resounded through the house, while the other, rushing to the bell rope, rang with all her strength. Andrea, as we can see, was surrounded by misfortune. "For pity's sake," he cried, pale and bewildered, without seeing whom he was addressing. "For pity's sake, do not call assistance. Save me. I will not harm you." "Andrea, the murderer!" cried one of the ladies. "Eugénie! Mademoiselle Danglars!" exclaimed Andrea, stupefied. "Help! Help!" cried Mademoiselle d'Armilly, taking the bell from her companion's hand and ringing it yet more violently. "Save me! I am pursued!" said Andrea, clasping his hands. "For pity, for mercy's sake, do not deliver me up." "It is too late. They are coming," said Eugénie. "Well, conceal me somewhere. You can say you were needlessly alarmed. You can turn their suspicions and save my life." The 2 ladies, pressing closely to one another and drawing the bedclothes tightly around them, remained silent to this supplicating voice, repugnance and fear taking possession of their minds. "Well, be it so," at length said Eugénie. "Return by the same road you came, and we will say nothing about you, unhappy wretch." "Here he is, cried a voice from the landing. "Here he is, I see him." The brigadier had put his eye to the keyhole, and had discovered Andrea in a posture of entreaty. A violent blow from the butt end of the musket burst open the lock, 2 more forced out the bolts, and the broken door fell in. Andrea ran to the other door, leading to the gallery, ready to rush out. But he was stopped short, and he stood with his body a little thrown back, pale, and with the useless knife in his clenched hand. "Fly, then!" cried Mademoiselle d'Armilly, whose pity returns as her fears diminished. "Fly!" "Or kill yourself," said Eugénie. Andrea shuddered, and looked on the young girl with an expression which proved how little he understood such ferocious honor. "Kill myself?" he cried, throwing down his knife. "Why should I do so?" "Why, you said," answered Mademoiselle Danglars, "that you would be condemned to die like the worst criminals." "Ah," said Cavalcanti, crossing his arms, "one has friends." The brigadier advanced to him, sword in hand. Come," said Andrea. "Sheathe your sword, my fine fellow. There is no occasion to make such a fuss, since I give myself up." And he held out his hands to be manacled. The 2 girls looked with horror upon this shameful metamorphosis, the man of the world shaking off his covering and appearing as a galley slave. Andrea turned towards them, and with an impertinent smile asked, "Have you any message for your father, Mademoiselle Danglars? For in all probability I shall return to Paris." Eugénie covered her face with her hands. Oh, said Andrea, "you need not be ashamed, even though you did post after me. Was I not nearly a husband? And with this raillery, Andrea went out, leaving the two girls a prey to their own feelings of shame and to the comments of the crowd. An hour after, they stepped into their calash, both dressed in feminine attire. The gate of the hotel had been closed to screen them from sight, but they were forced, when the door was opened, to pass through a throng of curious glances and whispering voices. Eugénie closed her eyes, but though she could not see, she could hear, and the sneers of the crowd reached her in a carriage. "Oh, why is not the world a wilderness?" she exclaimed, throwing herself into the arms of Mademoiselle d'Armilly, her eyes sparkling with the same kind of rage which made Nero wish that the Roman world had but one neck, that he might sever it at a single blow. The next day they stopped at the Hôtel de Flandre, at Brussels. The same evening, Andrea was incarcerated in the conciergerie.